In this video, we're going to continue to look at some of the new features and commands offered by CP/M3. One very useful new command is the set default command. This lets you tell CP/M a sequence of drives you'd like it to search through for a command you type on the command line. So let me run the set default command with no parameters, and it tells us what the current settings are. So right now it's only searching through one drive. If there was more drives, they would be listed here. So the first drive to search for is the default drive. Now the default drive is whatever shows right there, so that would be drive A. So if I wanted to see how much disk space I had left, I could type show. That program runs and tells me how much space is on each of my disks. The reason that worked is because the show.com file is present on the A drive, which is my current default drive. If I now switch to drive B, let's say this is my work disk and I have a bunch of programs on here for a system I'm working on, and I want to see if there's enough space to assemble this program and generate a listing file. So I type show, hoping to get disk space, and of course it doesn't work because I don't have show.com on this disk. And so I have to explicitly say A, and then it will work. Now after you've done this a few hundred times, trust me, you get tired of it, so you just end up copying show.com over to drive B. And before you know it, you have a whole bunch of utilities copied over to drive B. And now you've wasted a bunch of space on your work disk that could be used for work files instead. Well, the set default command lets you change and add drives to the search. So if I do set default asterisk, the asterisk means first place to look is the default drive. That's what the asterisk means. And then go look on the A drive. You could put more here, but there you go, see? Got to be on drive A. All right, so set default, because setdefault.com is not on drive B. Set default, search the default drive and then the A drive. And so now you can see we have two entries. Start with the default drive. If it's not there, go to the A drive. So let's go back to B, and now show works. Likewise, set default will now work. So you don't have to copy all those utilities on the different disks. You leave them all on one disk. And that way you have the latest version there instead of having to update a bunch of disks if any of your utilities happen to get new or change versions. Now one downside here is that the set default command is temporary, meaning that the next time you boot, that is gone. What you'd really like is that somehow that command get executed automatically every time you power up. Now, CP/M, even before CP/M3, has the ability to run a text file that has commands in it. And what you could do is have a text file that has the set default command in it for you. The problem is you need it to run whenever the system starts up. Well, that is one new feature in CP/M3, is that it makes it much easier to run any command file, any commands you want at startup. It does this by looking for a file automatically called profile.sub. Now a .sub file is essentially the batch files or the command files for CP/M. They're called submit files. And so here you see in this submit file I've got two commands. One is the set default command that gives me my default and A drive. It's a good spot to put a device command as well. If you recall from the last video, the device command allows you to change how the logical CP/M devices are associated with physical devices. Well, I want my aux device to go to something different than the CP/M default, so I've set it here so that whenever my machine boots up, it's now running exactly like I want it. So let's go ahead and reboot the machine and watch this boot up with this profile.sub automatically executed by CP/M. And resetting the machine, examining the boot ROM, and hitting run. Now, one downside of submit files is they're very slow to start. And you can see that by this long delay here. It's actually getting that submit file written out to the disk in a temporary format, and then it executes it, and you see the two commands. All right, so now we're up and running. It's not bad. It's still not a long time. Just a few sips of coffee, and now your system is up and running just like you want. So before I continue, I'm going to go ahead and use the device command we saw in that previous video to set up a second serial port to use as a second console. Handy feature lets us have two consoles hooked up to a single computer, and that way I can work from somewhere else. It's a little easier. So we saw that the profile.sub is automatically executed by CP/M3. That's a new feature for Power On. There's some other features that have been added regarding submit files. One has to do with how submit files are started. Normally, to start a submit file, you run the submit program and then give it the name of the submit file. So submit is actually just a .com file that has to be loaded. It then goes out and, in this case, looks for profile.sub. You don't have to put the .sub. And see, now it is running the profile.sub command file that we have demonstrated for starting up with CPM, but we manually ran it from the command line. What's new in CPM 3 is you can actually just type the name of the file, complete with the extension, and it knows to go out and run submit.com to then load and run profile.sub, the submit file. Now, CPM 3, there's one other neat little trick, and that has to do with using the set default command. Normally when you type a command, it goes out and it looks for a .com file. But you can see right here, this search order says com. You can actually add other things to search for example, .sub files, submit files. So let's go ahead and add that. So we'll say set default order equals, and we'll put in sub and com in here. It's going to search for sub files first and then .coms. So now, not only does it go out and look for .coms, if you don't type anything after the file name, it looks for .sub. So if we type in profile all by itself now, it goes out and it finds a profile.sub, and so it now executes it as a submit file. So that's another new feature in CPM 3. However, one of the best features with submit files in CPM 3 is the way it can now differentiate between commands in the file and lines in the file that are actually meant as program input. So for example, if we look at profile.sub, every line you see here is actually a command file that you would have typed in following the A. That's exactly what it was intended to do in the beginning, just run command files. That's the way CPM 2 and earlier worked. If you ran a program that needed input from the console, it literally went to the console still. It didn't come from the batch file or the submit file. Of course, there are situations where you wish it would do that, but that just wasn't the way it worked. So a program called xsub was written. Xsub was run before you'd run a batch file, and what it did is it hooked the console read routines in the BDOS so that when a program in a submit file asked for input, it came from the submit file instead of the console. Now that worked for the most part, but it was kind of brute force. It didn't have some of the flexibility you really need. It remained in memory after the submit file was done, and so the next submit file you ran did it again even if you didn't want it to. But what's changed with CPM 3 is that is all now done natively by the submit processing. So let's take a look at another submit file. I have something called submit demo here. And if you look in this file, this win, W-I-N, that's a program I wrote. It's called What Is Your Name? I'll show that in just a second. You can see it runs the program, then it runs the program again, and here it's running the program again. But these lines that have a less than sign in it, that is how it tells the submit system that that is not a command to be run, that is input data for the preceding program. And what's cool is you can now explicitly control that, and if you don't provide any input at all, it asks for the user. If you provide too much input, which we'll see is in the case with these two lines, it skips the extra input. And of course, if it has the exact right amount of input, which is what win needs is one line, then of course it's satisfied. So let's go ahead and run win. So it says, what is your name? Mike. That is all this program does. So it takes one line of input. So now let's go ahead and run that batch file. Let me type it again so it's on the screen as we run it. And again, because I did the set default, I can just type sub demo with no .sub after it, and I don't have to type submit. All right, so the first time it runs win, as you see up here, there is no input provided, so it's coming to me here on the screen, so I'm having to type. All right, now it's going to run it again, and it's got two lines of input available for it. So it took the first line, but you see the second line, it says, hey, I don't need that, it was ignored. So it was smart enough to ignore the line 2 up here, went on, ran the program again, and then it took the line 3 as intended and finished up. So you have explicit control over each line as you go through that. In addition to the automation provided by submit files in CPM, CPM 3 introduces two new commands that provide additional automation along these lines, the get and put commands. These basically allow redirection of console I/O to and from files, much like redirect operators would in Unix, or it was added in MS-DOS in version 2. So the get command allows you to tell CPM that all subsequent input for a program comes from a file instead of from the console. All right, so I have got a file out here called names.txt. It has one line in it, and we're going to have when the program, what is your name, take input from this file instead of from the console. To do that, you type get file names.txt. CPM will now set it up so that the next program you run gets its input from names.txt, like it just told you, rather than from the console. So if I now run when, you can see that it took the line from the text file. I didn't have to type anything. At this point, when is back to normal. In other words, console input is restored like it was. So that command only applies to the next file. If, however, you type a get command with the system option, then all input immediately starts coming from the file, including commands and everything. And it continues coming from the file until it's turned off with another get command. And let me show you that. So I've got a demo out here called when.txt. So it's going to run the when program, respond with name first time, when program again, name's going to be name second time. Then the final line is another command, it's get console. That's the get command reassigning input back to the console, at which point everything will be normal. This is essentially another way of doing batch files that has nothing to do with the submit system at all. In fact, it tends to run a bit faster. So we'll say get file when.txt and give it the system option. So we see get run here to begin with, and it tells us it's getting input from when.txt. Now it's running when again, console input's restored, and now you can see we're running again. So kind of interesting, you have a whole nother batch file system using the get utility if you want. All right, put does the exact opposite. It tells where you want output to go. So let's say we wanted to dump a hex dump of a file. Let's just dump ourselves. This gives us a nice hex dump with hex and ASCII. Let's say we wanted that to go to a file. So you would say put file, let's put it to dump.txt. Again, CPM tells us what it's going to do. And so now, when you dump it, it's still going to go to the screen. You can see it pause here briefly while it's doing file I/O, but it's also going to the text file. Now, there's a number of options that tell you whether to show it on the screen at all or not. You can actually redirect printer output as well, not just console output. And if we look at the file we dumped, you can see, sure enough, there it is. So a couple of handy utilities that are new in CPM3. Another thing that's new is the help system. You can type help and a command, and it brings up everything that you might need to know about the command online without having to go to the manual. And you can also take a look at subtopics like you see here, options and examples. So you can type options, and it'll tell you what the different switches are available on that. Anyway, so that's a nice quick way to get things up and going without having to refer to a manual as you're starting to learn CPM3. All right, now there's a number of other features in CPM3 that I haven't even mentioned because I have them disabled. These are commands like, or actually not even commands, these are features like date and time stamps on files, passwords on files, command line editing. All these good things are available in CPM3, but they're not enabled here. And the reason they're not enabled underlies one of the biggest new features of CPM3, and that's its ability to operate in either a banked or unbanked configuration, memory configuration that is. What we're running here is an unbanked version. This is pretty much the same as CPM has always been. Up in high memory is the complete BDOS, the complete BIOS, all the buffers and memory that those need, and then whatever's left below them is essentially program area for the user program. And as you might imagine, as you add features to CPM, it just gets bigger and bigger, which then takes away from program area. So there's this balance that has to take place between too much space or what features you want to add. So the unbanked version that we're running, CPM, Digital Research themselves, has basically said what features are in it. The banked version, however, doesn't have to worry about memory. In one bank, you can have CPM, the BIOS, the BDOS, buffers, all the information you need, and then over in a different bank can be the actual program area for user programs. It can be pretty much all of RAM, other than just a small interface section that links CPM to the user programs, and CPM then can transfer back and forth between the two banks. Now, the reason this is possible, in fact, it's very common, is because by 1983, single cards with 64K on them and even more were very common, and pretty much all of them supported banking. And that's where, under software control, all or part of the card can be swapped in and out of the processor's address space. So this was a really nice way to get many more features put into CP/M, but then at the same time actually increase the amount of RAM available to the end program. Now, my Altair didn't have any of those kind of boards in it, and the transition from CP/M2 BIOS to the CP/M3 is simpler by sticking with the unbanked format. But I will probably turn around and make a banked version of this sometime soon and demo that as well. All right, well, that pretty much covers our introduction to CP/M3. In the next video, we're going to take a look at how the programming environment changed. And there's quite a few changes there that are very specific to CP/M3 and underlie some of the changes that you've seen here. The programming environment makes that all possible. Now, the computer this demo all ran on today is actually an Altair 8800 clone computer. This computer accurately duplicates the look, the feel, features, performance, and the limitations of the original Altair 8800, but it does it with modern hardware on the inside so that you don't have to worry about damaging a vintage computer. This is a great way to run all of this old software and learn more about it without having to worry about keeping an old computer up and running. Be sure to visit altairclone.com to learn more about this great computer.